Welcome to another episode of the Weekly Crypto Check-In, recorded on May the 28th, 2025. I'm your host, Robert Swarthout, and I'm joined by my co-host, Andres Sandate. How's it going, Andres?
Hey, Robert. It's good. Happy post-Memorial Day, and hopefully the start of summer has been good for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like summer, I guess in some senses officially here with Memorial Day, but like we've had a spring in Atlanta. Like it's actually been not terribly hot. It's been heck, borderline cool. I have a pullover on today, and it's the end of May, which you normally wouldn't think about doing.
Sorry to interrupt you. We've had a lot of spring, end of year stuff with kids in school, and then swimming season and baseball season are like colliding. So parents always call May and December, like they merge it together as like May is becoming like the new December with all the end of the year stuff. So throw in Memorial Day, but it's been good. And you're right. Like it's been like kind of wet and cool. Like I was just saying, I kind of hope we get some sunshine here over the weekend, but
it'd be nice.
Yeah. Lots of like recordings with sort of like 10 to 14 days in between. So, crypto's marching on despite all of the stuff we're talking about here with our families.
Yep. Awesome. We'll just jump in here. So, U.S. Bitcoin holdings classified as the title here. So there's a Bitcoin conference going on, Bitcoin 2025, and Senator Loomis teased that she had an announcement to make. This is news as of yesterday afternoon. And she was up on stage, and apparently the news is, to me, it's not really news, that the government had done this internal audit to figure out how many Bitcoins it collectively holds amongst, I guess, all the different law enforcement agencies. And apparently they have classified the information. And I guess as governments do, she said that she's been offered a briefing. The running number that you would see many people talk about online is 200,000 Bitcoin. And that's, again, from different law enforcement actions where they seized it. This kind of leads into her desire to have the Bitcoin bill go through with the government would be buying 1 million different Bitcoins over the course of 5 years to, in her opinion, shore up the dollar. But we'll set that part aside. I don't know. It seems silly that they would be classified. Like, why does this is all publicly on chain if we knew the addresses? So it just seems odd.
Is there a national security consideration here? Just out of curiosity as to why
I don't know. This is fully a tinfoil hat comment here. You can make the argument that it's obviously probably not all in one address. So they've got it split amongst multiple addresses. They could make a couple of those addresses disappear if it was the CIA or something, and they need to use those funds for something else. Because the CIA likes to do stuff covertly. And they have been known to run businesses in the past, selling drugs and guns and all sorts of things. So maybe this would fall into that same bucket. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would hope not.
Well, there has been some intrigue with Bitcoin and some of the kidnappings and arrests. And, there was one yesterday I saw that made the headlines where a second individual turned themselves into authorities and was involved in this ransom plot and kidnapping. So, it doesn't take too much to kind of go, down that path around this. I don't know if any of that is connected, but certainly as Bitcoin has had a nice little rally here of late, it just feels like all this stuff always, kind of percolates to the top. So,
right. So it's, on the topic of Bitcoin, it did hit a high since we last recorded. It was like 111,000 and change. It's currently at 107,000. So within a couple percent there of the peak. And it's been in that range since. It's been in that 106 to 111 range, kind of this channel just kind of bouncing around. So it was seemingly good news continuing to come out about digital assets or Bitcoin in that case specifically. So equity is doing well. So it's kind of odd that it hasn't done a little bit more, but maybe it'll get going. Normally this May and the summer can be quiet for Bitcoin or for crypto in general. So I don't know if we'll see that this year or we'll see a change there, but we'll know here in a couple months one way or the other.
Yeah.
I guess let's move on here. So House GOP, well, excuse me, last week, the Senate, we talked about this, the Senate did have a vote, and they voted through the stablecoin bill. So now it's on to the House, and then on, assuming they pass it, which I assume that they will, because they're more, the Republicans have more control there, then it would potentially end up on Trump's desk like he was requesting, which is great. We needed this. And I think that generally everyone's happy with what's in that bill. This one that we're talking about here would be market structure bill. This would be for the rest of crypto. And I think it was ambitious to think that it would be August, but we are quickly getting it. The House in the GOP do plan to bring it up tomorrow to start discussing it. It just seems aggressive to think that we see this before the end of the year. I would love to. I would love to be wrong, but I've been let down so many times on these crypto bills. I've learned not to get my hopes up. So,
yeah, I mean, the President Trump had originally said he wanted a bill on his desk by the August recess, right?
The stablecoin bill, which did get through the Senate, right? So that one likely will end up on his desk before August. The thought that this one gets there as well, I mean, I would be happy if it did, but I don't think it's terribly likely.
We were sort of optimistic, I know, a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, that there would maybe this combination package in one swoop. We would see sort of transformative legislation come through. But yeah, it looks like politics has prevailed.
Yeah, and admittedly, the market structure bill's got more stuff in it. I mean, people can pick at it in a lot of other angles. That the stablecoin bill was rather straightforward. So we will hopefully get more about this soon, but it's maybe late 2025 would be my guess. So
yeah.
So our third topic here, back to Bitcoin. At Bitcoin 2025, Michael Saylor was up on stage on a panel. Someone in the audience asked him if Strategy, which used to be MicroStrategy, the company that he started and runs, would be willing to do proof of reserves for its Bitcoin and publish its addresses. It seemed like an innocent request. I mean, especially following FTX, there was a big push for exchanges to do this. And his answer is surprising everybody, even some other Bitcoin maxis at this point. He said it was a bad idea, which immediately puts you on edge. It's like, do I really need to prove this? And he says it basically the gist is he thinks it lessens the security around it. Why would you do that? For all the reasons that's exactly the reason we want. We would want to see it. I'm not saying right now that I think that he is doing anything nefarious. You would think that being a public company, there's some audits that kind of prove out that they have some ownership. I guess they would do that quarterly, or maybe it's yearly audits. I don't know what public companies go through, but he basically said that a Big Four audit should be enough, and everyone shouldn't worry about proof of reserves. When probably somebody might find a comment back when FTX happened. He probably was running his mouth saying we needed to have proof of reserves. It's just a bad look, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, on the surface, it sounds like a CEO standing up in front of a whole bunch of people at a conference saying, "Just trust me, it's all there."
It's literally what he's saying. Yeah. and if you remember the last time, or maybe 2 times ago when we recorded, there was one of the points that we made was like, how much evangelism is too much evangelism? Yeah. And he had posted this image on Twitter that looked like he was from, like the Bible ages. And he's like, has this basket of fish and bread, like kind of implying like he's like Bitcoin Jesus of sorts. And then he's doing this. I'm like, gosh, this good dude, his ego has gotten a hold of him is one thing I will go on the record and say, but it's just like, we don't need this in crypto. Like this, I don't know, in some sense, fall in line a little bit here. So,
yeah, it's as we talked about. I mean, I remember you and I having these conversations on this show 12 months ago, where we were sort of wishing and hoping that at some point, with the election results, not knowing what they were going to be, right? We were hoping that we would see like a regulatory framework that was more pro legitimizing of crypto and digital assets. We were looking for signs that, institutions, governments, and enterprises would start adopting, and utilizing crypto and blockchain technology. We were looking for, the good actors coming out of FTX who would stand up and sort of be, I don't know, representatives of even though crypto and the entire industry sort of came out of this whole DeFi anti-centralization ethos. You were hoping that there'd be these folks that would stand up, and Larry Fink obviously has emerged as one of those, right? But
Sure.
you were hoping there'd be some people within the industry, kind of natives. This guy could have been that, right? And sort of was for some period of time, but now,
Yeah.
yeah, it's so far out on the spectrum. I think
Mhm.
other folks and other voices are going to emerge as more like mainstream and
Right.
more, the consciousness of the industry, I would argue.
Right. And, I'm not saying that what I'm about to mention here is connected, but it does you make you wonder. So there is a group that is trying to push forward a class action lawsuit against MicroStrategy for misleading statements about their Bitcoin strategy. And then, so that's sitting out there. And then he does this at a conference. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm sure his legal counsel would not have told him to do this. Like,
Yeah,
we don't need to add
the PR
suspicion.
fiasco today and
Yeah.
this week, probably a lot of containment.
Yeah. So again, I don't know the details of that class action suit. I would say the strategy does seem odd. They probably can't sue them for being a bad portfolio manager but in some sense, there's grounds for it. He's always buying the top and never buying it when it's down.
Yeah.
So it seems odd. And people that are buying MicroStrategy because they want their Bitcoin exposure should just go buy Bitcoin. Don't get caught up in whatever this could potentially turn into. So,
yeah.
Anyways, let's move on to a more positive topic. So, our fourth topic here: the XRP ledger was chosen as a blockchain of choice for real estate, and this is happening in Dubai.
I was going to say the Middle East. Yeah.
The Middle East. Yeah. I really love, like, in some sense, they've been around for a long time in that part of the world, but like their whole infrastructure is kind of getting to get built at a much more modern, I guess, point in technology land. And so the Dubai Land Department, the DLD is what they refer to themselves as, is going to do real estate tokenization, and they're using the XRP ledger as the blockchain to do that. I'm not terribly surprised it was chosen, not because I think XRP is great, but just the amount of time that Ripple and their executives have spent over there, just like pushing the ledger for all sorts of different reasons, and this is one of them. It kind of adds up for me at this point. So it was kind of cool.
I mean, it's a validation, right, of their investment. We were talking about this before we went live. That I said, "Well, this seems like there's multiple headlines about XRP." And your comment was, well, there's probably a lot that's been going on. I mean, speculation, right? Yeah, you're not on the board or anything, but like, and they're a private company, but there's been this like plethora of announcements with them over the last like 3 months.
Right.
And your first comment was, well, a lot of this could have been going on, right? But because of the litigation and the threat of litigation and the government having their sort of thumb on, XRP for prior 4 years, there was a lot of, I think you're right. Like there was a lot of hesitation maybe to come out vocally and show association or ties to the company. And that seems to have changed. That tide shifted.
Right. And I guess another way to illustrate, just kind of like, there's 1,000 people that work at Ripple. They're doing something.
Sure.
They've been doing something for a while. And I mean, going on 10 years, not all 1,000 of them, but it's a, for the longest time that they were saying quarterly, oh, we've signed so many deals this last quarter. They've stopped that for the last couple of years, largely during the lawsuit. That number probably 3 years ago at this point was 180 different deals had been signed, like enterprise deals. And you probably couldn't even name 24 of them. So there's a lot of stuff under NDA. And most of it doesn't need to be public. I mean, people can use that ledger, use their technology and never say it publicly, and it would work just fine. So we likely wouldn't know most of them long term. So
yeah, the only other comment I would make about all of the news is, the public company Palantir, right? For years they were private, and people in technology and in Silicon Valley knew the company, knew the management team, and they were obviously busy at work doing significant amount of business with, US governments and other,
Mhm.
foreign governments. And then it's like when they went public, all of a sudden,
Yes.
they were the darling of the S&P last year. Didn't start off the year this year so hot, like a lot of publicly traded companies.
Mhm.
But it's an example, right? I guess a parallel. That company has been doing a lot behind the scenes privately, couldn't talk publicly, couldn't disclose a
Mhm.
lot of things because of NDAs, and obviously their customer base is governments and
Right.
enterprises. And XRP in some ways is similar, right? They're working with a lot of obviously very powerful institutions and enterprises and governments, and all this stuff is slowly dribbling out. The other thing I was gonna say, I saw a headline last week, somewhat tied in to XRP because they have a stable coin, or Ripple does.
Yep.
That a lot of the big banks, JP Morgan and others, there
Yep.
was a report that came out in the Wall Street Journal, more of a mainstream business trade
Mhm.
publication that covers crypto, but it's generally only, when there's either a controversy or some news making headline,
Sure.
that the banks are starting to study, do they need to kind of jointly come out with their own stable coin?
Mhm.
And, that caught my attention because, Ripple and some of these other companies we've talked about on this
Right.
update, um, have been in that business for some time, Circle and
Mhm.
Tether. So
Yeah.
it's pretty fascinating when you step back and see all the bigger players now
Mhm.
recognizing the business opportunity and recognizing the revenue and profit potential that they're, leaving on the table.
Agreed. That news that didn't make it into this list about that stablecoin for that group of four. If they did it, what I would find more interesting is where they plan to issue it on, which
Yeah,
change, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah, you might have, who knows what they call it, but like you might have a JP Morgan stablecoin, but if it's on networks people don't want to use, or are they going to put on multiple, which would make more sense? Because that just brings more opportunity to those networks, because there's liquidity sitting there, people can use it for things. So it's more of the oil in the system of sorts.
but it also comes back to the point you made. There's 1,000 people at Ripple, right?
Mhm.
And so they're doing something, right? And these are the types of things they're doing. They're talking to these big enterprises and governments
Sure.
and institutions, and there's engineers talking to engineers, and there's projects going on.
Yep.
So, we as the customer investor, like far down the chain, if you will, probably only hear about this stuff,
Mhm.
months and sometimes years after, the initial work and
Yep.
sort of projects got underway.
100%. Okay. Well, our next topic is Kraken, a crypto exchange, which many people probably have heard of at this point. Is to soon start offering tokenized stocks and ETFs. There can be 50 different stocks and ETFs, including Apple, Tesla, and Nvidia. Probably the top,
Yeah.
50 or top 40 biggest with some ETFs mixed in there.
Yeah, your biggest,
Um,
most liquid names. Yeah.
yeah, it's my guess
Tech
is then
heavy.
it's still 24/7 trading and all the
Yeah.
things that you get with crypto. Um, this is a headline, but also this is not a headline. Like, this is going to happen. This is
Yeah.
going to happen everywhere. I think if anything, Kraken, Uphold does a little bit of this. They're just getting ahead of the curve. I think once these big brokerage houses decide to do this, who knows? Maybe Kraken it kind of winds down this part of the business, because like, why would you go buy a tokenized stock on Kraken versus your brokerage account?
Well, you're right. And as you're describing that, which is a great explanation, it sort of makes me think about Apple, right? Like
Mhm.
they have they have dominated different consumer electronic categories, not by
Yes.
being first, but by being the one that came in with the better product, or
Mhm.
right, the
Reducing
customer
friction. Yeah.
base that was there and ready and primed. So the early adopter that's going to go do this on Kraken is probably more for novelty. The
Mhm.
bigger institutional, big retail trader, like they're going to stick with
Right.
Schwab, and they're going to stick with Interactive
Right.
Brokers, and they're going to stick with, the major exchanges where they're currently doing business. Just a matter of time.
Yep. So I don't know. There's not tons to talk about here, but
But
it,
tokenization,
it's
it's happening.
tokenization. It's
Yeah,
happening, and it's
yeah,
you're gonna wake up one day, and all of a sudden it's gonna be everywhere, and this is
yeah.
gonna be part of how you got there. Um, our next topic is XRP futures launched on the CME, and I think what's interesting about this, to me at least, is the obviously it's a regulated XRP futures. That has somewhat been a prerequisite for getting an ETF approved for spot ETF. So you have that. Whether this SEC views that as a requirement or not, I don't know. But what was very exciting for Ripple was they're in the process of closing that acquisition to Hidden Road. The first trade of that futures was settled at the CME by Hidden Road. So like eventually that will even be settled onto the XRP ledger. That's part of the goal with that Hidden Road acquisition, but that part is not happening yet. This is cool to kind of see all this tied together, and baby steps will turn into much bigger steps, I think, here in the not too distant future. So
yeah, it's just really fascinating to see. I mean, we talked about the token, we talked about the stable coin. Some of these, altcoins or alt tokens, as we've called them, or the industry calls them, the utility aspect, right? And I was reading a blog yesterday from the folks at Arca, and they were talking about different utility. There's social utility, which you can't underweight when it comes to crypto, right? And so when you think about like the meme coins and the Trump coins and things of like the social utility is real. There's the commercial utility. And then, you add those two together, they're making the argument. And then you have like the tokenomics and financial aspect. And that's kind of how you, or at least that's how they can sort of ascribe value, which is an interesting approach to valuation when you step back from it and say, how do you put a price on these tokens? And, I think it's kind of fascinating to look at the ones that are actually getting traction with real customers, real counterparties. The CME is real, it's large,
yes,
and a meaningful player when it comes to futures. So, just got to take notice.
Yeah, and this really admittedly bleeds into our next topic. So the DTCC, most people probably have no idea what this is, but this is basically the agency of record for who owns what stock and bond, ETF, all the things in the U.S. Something like $10 trillion under basically guidance. I don't know what the word would be for them, but under record, I guess. So they're not like a BNY. They're not a custody. They're just dealing with the record of it. But they have recently some patents came out that they had published or that they had submitted that show XRP and XLM being used as part of their tokenization, right? We've talked all about real world tokenization. Heck, even earlier in the show when we were talking about XRP ledger chosen for real estate in Dubai. This is another example of it. The DTCC, a representative for the DTCC was recently at a panel at a conference and said that they are going to soon start tokenizing. They're not quite ready to do it yet, but it will be here soon. And I mean, I think it's fair to say maybe in the long term, I don't know, call it 5 years, 5-10 years maybe, that everything that they have is tokenized on a blockchain, and just it's could be pretty impactful.
Oh, huge. I mean, you can't underscore the ramifications of this organization. It's kind of a quasi industry friendly organization in the sense
they're owned by a bunch of banks. If I'm not mistaken.
It's a consortium. I kind of look at them as like the SWIFT, right? Their infrastructure, call it, is how all the settlement and reporting, and when you as a investor open up your brokerage statement and you see that you own a stock or a mutual fund or an ETF, right? All that reporting to your custodian and ultimately to, let's say, your bank or brokerage firm, all that reporting and the plumbing and the information and data flows is all, tied in with DTCC. And without it, it would be very difficult to do settlement and reporting so people could see what the values of their assets are. And so, if they can do stocks and bonds and mutual funds and ETFs, the technology is clearly there or will be shortly for them to do, everything, right? Partnerships and everything else. And what's even more interesting for me as somebody that's been in the alt space for a long time is DTCC has a division called AIP, or another aspect of DTCC is AIP, which is the alternative investment part of it. So any firm that you talk to that wants to sell their fund through a network of wealth managers and financial advisors, they get and apply for a CUSIP. And that CUSIP is an identifier which allows it to be reported on a statement.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine if they're able to assign a QSIP to a fund, if they can now, using the blockchain technology, basically track any, asset. There still probably is an application process to go and get a QSIP, but it's a game changer when it comes to a lot of different aspects of settlement, reporting, transparency, and ultimately where I think alts want to go is around liquidity.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. That guy that was on that panel was saying how it was a big push, I don't know, 3 years ago when they went from T+3 or 2 down to T+1 that it is now.
Yeah.
And obviously the next step would be T+0. And what does 0 really mean? I mean, it's functionally atomic instant settlement. I think within a minute is what he was thinking. So there's some blockchains, if he's really saying minute is the cutoff, there's some blockchains that obviously wouldn't work on Bitcoin. It likely could work on Ethereum. But again, some of these networks don't have the throughput that the DTCC would bring to it. So you'd have to start thinking about other technology solutions to kind of deal with it. But it's cool to see that it being talked about publicly. This has been speculated for a long time.
So the patent that they filed with the U.S. Patent Organization, did they name other?
Those are the only two that I saw. I didn't read the whole patent, admittedly, but it's
Okay.
but those are the two that jumped out, and there was some news circulating around those two as well.
Yeah.
So, and again, for those that don't know the history here, XRP was a network that was in place. There was a bit of a breakup of founders of sorts, and one of them spun off and created XLM from the original source code of XRP, which was open source, totally fine. So they're similar in nature. They have since kind of gone down two separate paths, have different features of sorts, but there's a good amount in common between those two networks.
Fascinating.
Sometimes they're viewed as big brother, little brother in different circles. So.
Yeah.
So our last topic here is a quick one. So if we rewind to December or early January, so January of last year, or even December of 23, I forget. It happened right around that New Year's time. Somebody hacked the SEC's Twitter account and made an announcement that they were approving the Bitcoin ETFs. Oddly enough, that happened literally the day before that the SEC actually approved the Bitcoin ETFs. The gentleman that was caught, rather short order after that, he was given, I want to say, 14 months in prison for his little escapade of tweeting. So, not really news here. I guess a bit of a closing of that story. And I guess don't do something stupid like this is maybe the moral here. Even as fun as it may seem in the moment, you will get caught.
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember that headline when it came out, and it, with crypto and X, there's usually a short wick between news and it making its way into X and through social media. So yeah, that was news. Sometime back.
It moved the price too. I want to say it was like a 10% move or something like that. So.
Yeah. Unfortunately, probably won't be the last person that's tied to this industry that ends up, making a kind of a foolish move.
Correct.
And so, yeah. Well, look, I mean, my big takeaway from today's news is that, yeah, there is some stuff out there, like the Sailor headline around, this comment around bad idea to basically tell you what we own or have somebody validate what we own.
Right.
And, continue to be some sort of resistance in Capitol Hill around what we think would be legislation that would kind of move the overall industry forward. But there's other things going on clearly that are quite promising in terms of, the Middle East with Dubai and their, decision to choose XRPL. So I'm, I know the summer, like you said, can be somewhat of a slower, more benign time for crypto, but I don't know. It feels like if we get this bill, and we'll just have to see, what happens with some of these trade announcements. The summer going into the fall could be a quite interesting time for this, for the space.
Agreed. Well, I think that's a wrap. So thanks for joining us on this episode of the Weekly Crypto Check-In. To stay updated on future episodes, you can find us in any podcast player by searching Teton Crypto Capital or the Weekly Crypto Check-In. Take care.
The information presented in this podcast is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, trading, or any other advice. The content provided is general in nature and not tailored to any individual's specific circumstances. Always conduct your own due diligence and consult with a professional financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Cryptocurrency trading involves significant risks, including, but not limited to, the potential for loss of all or a portion of your investment, market volatility, and regulatory uncertainty. The hosts, guests, and producers of this podcast are not responsible for any decisions or actions taken based on the information discussed herein. Cryptocurrency is not legal tender in many jurisdictions and is subject to market risks. Past performance does not guarantee future results. This podcast does not endorse or guarantee any investment outcomes or results. Use of this podcast implies your acceptance of this disclaimer.